So the elaborate complexity of the dresses of the Maenads has already been discussed, and now we move on to the anatomical complexity on select examples. Jaap Hemmelrich specifically compares number 21 and number 2, which is, the Heracles attacking Alcyoneus, and of course the one that we are already been discussing, the Boston deer hunt, and the satyr abduction of Sita by Ravana. So he states, however, even more advanced than these fine dresses of the Maenads are the anatomical renderings on this same vase, number 2, and on number 21, Rome Alcyoneus. The arms, hands, legs, and feet of the ladies and satyrs of number 2, and of its nude hunters, and those of Heracles and his victim Alcyoneus on number 21, display a surprising anatomical knowledge of the bones and muscles of these parts. And if you look on the left side here, in color, you can see the Caeretan hydria, where Heracles attacks Alcyoneus, the giant demon. And Heracles is nude, and he has the bow in his left hand, much like Rama and Laksmana in the number 2 hydria. And you also have Hermes on the left watching as a witness. So the similarity in terms of the anatomical complexity is a hint that if number 21 has famous mythical characters such as Heracles and Alcyoneus, then number 2 must also have a myth with characters who are just as famous and should be something that we can name, someone we can name. So Tityos, for example, who tries to rape Apollo's mother, Leto, and Alcyoneus are satyrs who are connected stylistically and anatomically to the satyr in the number 2 hydria. And that confirms that Ravana is an analog to those two. And therefore, likewise, Rama and Lakshmana are counterparts to Heracles. So it shouldn't be difficult to accept that if the characters on the number 21 are anatomically well depicted, then and so are the number 2, then they both must have explicitly nameable characters. The anatomical rendering of Sita's hand also tells us about her level of physical distress. And continuing his discussion on anatomy, the author Hemmelrich remarks about the wonderful hand of the girl of the early vase number 2, who is carried off, not unwillingly, by her brutish lover. Note the slight bend in the little finger and the subtle swelling of the articulations in the other fingers. So, what does this quote really tell us? Well, her brutish lover is definitely Ravana. That's a correct description, but the not unwillingly seems, again, a bit incorrect and also confused. And so we'll get back to that in a second. So what I would say here in my description is that Sita's right hand, as you see on the right, is loose and pointed down, indicating her resignation at being taken to an unknown place, a clear contrast to her left hand, the fist that she makes in the scene on the right side. Resignation in defeat, in my opinion, is obviously not the same as the willingness to be taken away. So that kind of rules out the not unwillingly part, which I think is not accurate. But the brutish lover part is accurate. Now, the next point is that when Rama carries Sita in the Campana plaque, neither one of her arms is shown, because she has no desire to resist and is willingly cradled in his arms like a baby. I think the author's conclusion of willing abduction is mainly due to the ignorance of the sequential nature of the mythological scenes in the number 2 hydria. He fails to associate the two Maenads and the two satyrs with one another and recognize that they are the same person. And that's why he doesn't see the sequential nature of the mythological story or the connected narrative that is there. And what's funny and ironic is that later on we'll see that he he wants to see a more connected narrative for the number 3 hydria, which is about Hermes and Apollo and the stealing of cattle. But he doesn't recognize the connected narrative that is clearly in this hydria. So, what is the connected narrative here? Well, or the sequence? Well, the first event is on the front side, on the obverse, which is the hunting of the golden deer or Maricha in the form of a stag by the two nude youths, Rama and Lakshmana. The second part of the sequence is Ravana approaching Sita with unwanted sexual advances, which is on the right side of the backside. And then, on the left side of the reverse side, we have the third part of the sequence, Ravana carrying Sita away to Lanka. So if the author had recognized the fact that the characters Ravana and Sita are the same, the satyr and Maenad on both sides of the reverse side, he would have realized perhaps the sequential nature of it, and he would not have made the incorrect statement of not unwillingly, because she's clearly unwilling to be taken, but has in the left scene, the third scene, she has become resigned to her fate and does not resist any longer. Now, my conclusion would be that both Maenads represent Sita in the Boston Hydria from Caere. But what about the Campana panels, the painted terracotta plaques? Well, in those also, similarly, all three women that are painted on those panels are representations of Sita, in my opinion, who is the wife of Rama. If you look at zoomed photos of the two Maenads for comparison of facial appearance, arms, and dress, you'll notice a lot of similarity. There is looser hair seen on the left Maenad because she has quit resisting Ravana's control, in my eyes, from what I'm seeing. Now, with regard to the Campana panels, Mario A. Del Chiaro, in his article, Two Etruscan Painted Terracotta Panels from the J. Paul Getty Museum Journal, Volume 11 in 1983, he explicitly notices that there are essentially congruent profile heads exhibited by the women depicted on 3 of the Campana panels, which are also dated 530 to 520 BCE in his journal article. So, he's practically telling us that these 3 women on the Campana panels are the same person. He's practically admitting it. And as far as I'm concerned, it's quite obvious that they are all Sita. And as we have discussed earlier. And not only that, you see the congruence in the dating as well. The Boston Hydria and the Campana panels both originate in Caere, circa 525 BCE. So, really, there's just too many coincidences here for them to be just random coincidences. Finally, please look at the 2 images on the bottom, which are both from the Campana panels and are the best examples of the face of Sita that you can find. And in the first one, we are pretty familiar with that. That's the one in which she's being carried off by Rama and rescued. In the other one, she's walking with Rama and Lakshmana in the middle, in between them, and she's holding a plant, which is very typical in many ways of depictions of Rama and Sita and Lakshmana walking in the forest in Indian artwork as well. So, and you can see the face is almost identical in both of these 2 scenes, which are both from the Campana series. So the first thing I want to discuss on this slide is the painting on the right, which is another Campana panel among the 5 that are existent. And in this one can see 3 different figures: a winged female figure on the right in the top right corner, and then a bearded man with black hair sitting on the right pensively with his knuckles near, on his chin. And then you have the even older man with gray hair on the left holding a stick, who's probably giving him some kind of advice. And in my opinion, this is King Dasaratha on the right, sitting pensively and consulting his counselor, the elderly Vashishta, who was the royal advisor in the household in the kingdom of Ayodhya in the Indian epic Ramayana. And the winged female figure above is about to attack them or strike them, especially Dasaratha on the right, as she's flying directly above him. And this is basically a depiction of the very important event in the Ramayana where Kaikeyi requests boons that cause Rama to be exiled and her own son Bharat to be crowned king temporarily. And Bharat is her own son, whereas Rama is her stepson from another wife of Dasaratha. And so this scene basically, metaphorically you could say, or figuratively, depicts Kaikeyi killing Dasaratha the king, even though in reality she does it in a less dramatic way. The renowned Italian scholar Massimo Palatino, in his book Etruscan Painting, describes this same scene, and he says, "Two bearded elderly men are seated on folding chairs facing each other. They are wearing Greek tunics, mantles, and peaked shoes. One of them holds a specter. The other is resting his head on his hand in an attitude of pensive sadness. Above them, on the right, a winged female figure is shooting arrows towards them." So clearly he agrees with my assessment and description as well. And it's quite obvious that the queen Kaikeyi is the winged female figure who is ruining King Dasaratha's plans to crown his own eldest son, Rama, king, and instead forces him to send his dearest son, Rama, into exile, thereby killing the king because of heartbreak. So the Caeretan hydria, with the deer hunt and the abduction, and the Campana panels which show Rama and Sita and Laksmana, are both Ramayana scenes, and unfortunately they are kept far apart from each other in museums around the world. One of them is kept in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the hydria, and then the Campana panels, which are 5 of them, are kept in the Louvre Museum in Paris. But even though they are far apart when in terms of where they are kept in the modern world, they're actually intimately related, and they certainly were produced in the same region of Caere. So the Campana painted terracotta panels are likely the work of painters in the same workshop that produced Caeretan hydriae. So either the artists from the Caeretan hydria workshop were the same artists who painted the terracotta panels that we see in the Campana series, or they collaborated with other Ionian artists who painted those terracotta panels. And Jaap Hemmelrich has repeatedly emphasized that Ionian immigrants, probably from Phocaea, probably specialized in both architectural terracottas and or panel painting, along with the pottery that we see from the Caeretan hydria workshop. And he repeats this over and over again in his book Caeretan hydriae. Now, moving on from that issue, I also want to add in some commentary about the panels themselves. In an article, In Search of Etruscan Colors, a spectroscopic study of a painted terracotta slab, You see that the Italian authors also make some good observations here. They say, essentially documented in Cerveteri, series of these painted terracotta panels fixed in succession using strong nails to a wooden frame mounted on the wall adorn the internal spaces of temples, patrician houses, and aristocratic tombs. So the Italian authors acknowledge the importance of these terracotta panels, given their placement in temples and aristocratic homes and tombs. But they also acknowledge that, and we can quote them here, that painted terracotta slabs, which are characteristic of Etruscan art, are much less known than the funerary frescoes of the Etruscan necropolis, and have never been studied by advanced diagnostic techniques. So this tells us that they haven't done enough research about these painted terracotta panels, and that includes the Campana series. Continuing with our discussion of how the Caeretan painted panels are directly connected to the Caeretan hydria, we have an even more revealing quote here from the same Italian authors in the article that we just quoted on the previous slide, the In Search of Etruscan Colors, a spectroscopic study of a painted terracotta slab. These Italian authors add on the next page that refined stylistic analyses have shown that a group of panels with a high aesthetic quality recovered from the Cerveteri urban site was manufactured by craftsmen who moved from eastern Greece to Etruria, that is Ionia to Etruria, and to whom the particular type of pottery called hydria Caeretani, that is the Caeretan hydria, is generally ascribed. The iconographic repertoire comprises scenes representing epic and mythological subjects. These painted panels constitute one of the most important examples of Hellenic style and, at the same time, original products of Etruscan artistic culture. This is a pretty loaded quote here, and clearly they're making a direct connection here between the painted terracotta panels in Cerveteri to the Caeretan hydria, and they're also connecting the Ionian immigrant artists to both. And they're also acknowledging the epic and mythological content or subject matter in both of the works, and they're also recognizing the importance of them, and yet they haven't been properly understood or studied and explained, which is a travesty. The Italian author Raffaella Bonato confirms this connection specifically between the Campana slabs and the Caeretan hydria. She writes, already in 1962, K. Friis Johansen highlighted the very strong influence of Etruscan art on the workshop of the Caeretan hydria, emphasizing in particular the relationships that unite them to the production of Campana slabs, and deduced that the ceramic workshop must have been located in Caere. She also adds and summarizes that in the same years, F. Francisco Roncalli tackled the study of the painted slabs from Caere, identifying a series which presents for the first time the absolute dominance of those Ionic influences, already highlighted sporadically in other examples, and leads one to imagine the direct settlement of Greek Oriental artists, and first of all of the master of the hydria, the Caeretan hydria, which had already taken place in Etruria and in Cerveteri in particular. So she again is summarizing all of this evidence that connects not only the painted terracotta panels from Caere to the Caeretan hydria, but also specifically the Campana slabs themselves, which, as I've already demonstrated, are clearly depicting Ramayanic episodes from the Indian legend which is clearly of Eastern origin, obviously, and therefore it's not a Greek myth. I want to specifically point out now that the Caeretan hydria number 2 in Boston, which is the deer hunt and the abduction, is more closely related to the Campana panels than any other existing hydriae. So all the other Caeretan hydriae may be artistically, stylistically somewhat similar to the Campana panels, but this specific hydria number 2 has not only a similarity in style, artistic style, but also they share the same subject matter, which is the epic mythology of the Indian Ramayana, especially the stories from the plot of the third book, the Book of the Forest in the Ramayana, which is called the Aranyakanda. So, what is the evidence that proves that the Caeretan hydria number 2 is the most closely related to the Campana panels of all the hydriae? Well, the early dating of the Caeretan hydria number 2, which is circa 525 BC, should be seen as a clue to its intimate relationship to the Campana panels, which date to the same period. Later hydriae produced in the Caeretan workshop are not as intimately related, as they are quite a bit further produced in future years, in later years. So if you go by Hemmelrich, he tells us that he uses the number 2 vase as kind of a reference point because of the fact that it's such an early vase. He says that it seems likely that the latest hydriae were made 15 to 20 years after number 2, and therefore probably are not related to the Campana panels at all, at least not when it comes to subject matter. Now, the next point I'm saying is that the scholars, they have recognized that the Caeretan hydriae, as we have shown on the previous slides, are generally related to the Campana panels artistically, but they have not specifically identified which ones share the same subject matter or mythological content, as I have. Now, another quote I'm going to give you here is from the scholar M. Cristofani. After analyzing the contributions of the northern Ionian ceramists in Etruria from about 530 BC, traced the Caeretan pinaques, which are the painted terracotta panels, to the workshop of the Caeretan hydriae. So he made the same match there, and he also recognizes a production less conditioned by Attic from Athens and Clazomanian ceramography, and one that's also freer in its expressive forms, with a predilection for narration, which is what we see in both the Campana plaques and in the Caeretan hydria number 2. We see a predilection for narration of a certain episode, not just one event at one time, but multiple events at the same, happening in a sequence.